All right. I think we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. I hope we have viewers from everywhere. My name is Quinn Jacobson, and we're going to do this little Studio Q live show. I'm going to have to mute my. I'm going to have to mute my YouTube stream here, but welcome to the Studio Q live stream show. Or the live show. I wanted to come on and just chat with you guys for a little bit and answer your questions if you have any. I have a couple on the board here. I get email quite frequently, of course, for all kinds of technical questions. Sometimes I get questions about conceptual things and making photographs and using this process and all kinds of stuff. And we're going to specifically talk about the wet plate collodion process. That's kind of what I specialized in over the last couple of decades, and I published a few books. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my new book. I still have a few of these left. These are the limited edition chemical pictures book. Chapter 13 has the ghost dance work in it, and I have my here. I have my signature page. I number them. We're into the 200s now. I don't have a specific number. Troubleshooting, pigment prints, all kind chemicals, resources, all kinds of stuff in here. Go to my website at studioq.com if you're interested in getting a copy of that. I still have a few of those left. I didn't know how many I'd have left come 2020. I did the work in the teens throughout last year, 2019. And happy 2020, by the way. It's the 3rd of January today, which is kind of interesting. See what the 2020s will bring us here. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat room over here. I have a little bit of a delay. Hey, looks good, guys. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year to you all as well. We have a lot of good stuff, I think. I hope coming this year. I hope all the predictions for the 2020s aren't like the 1920s. And I hope people are wrong about that, but we'll see, I guess, huh? So I want to talk to you guys today about a couple of issues. Varnishing problems, some chemistry, safety and handling issues, and Marcus just wrote me about handling plates. Your customers, you're making plates and you're giving them off to people purchasing them or having their portrait done, and how do you handle that kind of stuff. I want to address all of these. First, we'll start with varnishing, and with my book. Remember here, I've got 42 high definition videos that come with this. Login information is in the book. I cover all of this stuff quite in depth, but I know there's language barriers and there's all kinds of issues, and I cover everything in the book, but sometimes there's specific questions that people want addressed, and that's why I come on and try to do these live shows and try to answer them as we go through this. So that's what I'm doing today. I'm going to cover the first one is varnishing. Varnishing. What is varnishing? Why do we do it? In fact, I have a little jar that I just mixed up here, dissolved all of the gum sandrock in it. I haven't added the lavender oil yet. I do that pretty much post filtering, if you will, just to get the volume right. But let's talk about what is varnishing and why is it important to do it. Varnishing is the final step in the process of making plates. I don't care if you're making them on glass or metal or plastic or whatever you're making images on. What is varnishing for, and what does it do? Varnishing is to protect. Keep in mind, what is the image we're making, right? Let's talk about that for just a second. I should have had some images over here, but that's okay. Let me go grab an image. Just hold on a second here. Let me grab one of these images. just so we have a photograph to talk about. What can we use here? There's a pretty decent one here. So let's talk about what is varnishing. What is it? What is it? What does it do? What's the function of it? Let's first talk about the image. What are we talking about when we talk about making a photograph? I just grabbed this kind of bum tintype here that we'll use. What is it that we're talking about when we make an image? We're talking about pouring collodion on a plate, sensitizing it in silver bath. And a silver bath, that's the collodion has two salts in it, right? An iodide and a bromide. Usually, you can, there's variations of that. But those iodides are turned into light-sensitive halogens, right? And that we talked about this many times, this double replacement or metathesis process. That creates primarily a silver iodide, a silver bromide as well. You bring the plate out, you put it in your camera, you expose it to light, some source of light. You go back in and you develop it. What happens when you develop it? You reduce the light energy that's hit the plate in the specific areas. You reduce that silver to the pure metallic state of silver. So my point is what you have on the plate is silver. This is metallic silver. The highlights are metallic silver. So obviously the shadow areas and those kinds of things are just glass or black metal in this case. This is just a piece of aluminum. That image is silver. So, and you can kind of see it too here. If I just get it just right, you see the highlights there. That image is silver. So what happens if I leave this plate unvarnished? And I live in Denver, Colorado here in the metro area, Denver, Colorado. What happens if I leave that plate unvarnished? We have exposed silver. Does anyone have silverware, or your grandparents or great-grandparents had silverware? And over time, what happens to that silver? What happens to those utensils? They tarnish, right? They start to turn black. What happens is the sulfides in the air react with the silver on the plate, and you create what's called silver sulfide. Silver sulfide is black. Unfortunately, you can't take a tarnish remover to a photograph. I guess you could if you wanted to. But the idea is that you need to protect that silver from the sulfides in the air. If you're out people ask me this all the time about varnishing. What if I'm out in the country, or how long will it, it's not that question. It's how long will it take before my plate tarnishes or turns black? And I tell them this. I say, it depends on where you live. In a big city or in an area that has a lot of pollution or a lot of industry, it might only take a couple, 3 weeks. If you're way out in the country, away from everything, you may last years, right? It just depends. Back in the day, they had a lot of plates that they'd make the photograph, specifically, let's say a portrait. And when you dry a plate down, it gets about 1.5 to 2 times brighter. So if the photographer had the image underexposed a little bit, it would dry bright. And people, oh, that looks great. So they wouldn't varnish it, and they'd put a piece of glass over it, which was another expensive kind of process to do back in the day. And they wouldn't varnish it, and they'd seal it up. I've done that. It works really well, even in very polluted areas. So it just depends on where you're at, the conditions, your environment, the pollution in the air. I say it's a really good habit to get really good habit to form, to make your plates. At the end of the day, the end of the session, varnish those plates. That's a really good habit. Let me check this chat here. Yes, Happy New Year to everyone. That's great. Frederico Mendez. Hello, Quinn. I have a question. I don't think it's a varnishing problem, but I have some plates that a few days after I varnish them, some black dots appear. I'm sorry for No, that's great. Varnishing. I'll address that. Suggesting on getting rid of the matte finish after varnish. Dawn Day. Yes, let me address that as well too. or near the sea, the salt will tarnish quickly. Absolutely correct. Any of that exposure, Mr. Adam Ramsey, I guess, any exposure to environmental exposure, really, really hard. Anything that happens with a plate, silver, anything that happens to silver in the exposed environment will happen to your plates, and even probably a little quicker. Sean Robinson. Oh, Sean wrote me yesterday. Hi, Quinn. Safety tips for varnishing process, particularly with regards to flammability. Can you use hair dryers or halogen lamps? Okay, so let's address these. So you know why you varnish? To protect the silver, right? The plate has plate. The highlights, especially midtones, are made of silver. Exposure to sulfides, primarily sulfides, can be a whole slew. Whatever might be in your environment can react with the silver. Sulfides are the most apparent, though. Creates silver sulfide and causes blackening or darkening of the plate. Let's address the first thing. After a few days after you varnish them, you have black spots on them. Now, that's not specifically, that may not be a varnishing problem. It may be an iodide or over-iodized bath problem or over-iodized collodion problem. A lot of times when you get pinholes or spots on your plate, that means you have, you want to saturate your bath with iodides, but there comes a point where it fills up so much that the iodides actually precipitate out onto the plate and create what's called pinholes, or little black dots. If they're on black metal, they'll appear as black dots. If they're on glass, they'll be little tiny pinholes. They will be consistent all over the plate, very universal. If they don't appear that way, then you have other contaminants that over time will react with the silver, even especially after you've varnished, and you'll see those appear. So it could be there's many, people ask me these technical questions, and I'm not there with you, so I can't see what your environment is, how you handle the plates, how you mix the chemistry. I encourage everyone to mix their own chemistry if they can, and try to understand. And it takes time. This is a process. It's not an event. Try to understand the best you can how the process works, what each of the compounds do in the process, and try to understand and troubleshoot on your own. It doesn't happen overnight, especially for those that aren't chemists. And I surely wasn't a chemist, but over the years I've had to learn and adjust and figure out physics and chemistry and why things work the way they do, and temperatures and pH and humidity and all kinds of stuff. And this process, if you really want to get it down, takes a lot of specific, if you really want to get it right, takes a lot there is a window you want to work in. There's a lot of latitude. If you're talking about just making a plate, you can really slop it together, and there's a lot of latitude there, and you'll do just fine. But if you're talking about specifically making negatives or making well-exposed, well-developed positives, there is a window there that you want to work in. And to understand that, you need to understand how the process works in the chemistry. So Frederico, it could be an iodide problem. It could be the way the chemistries mix. It could be environmental, something on the plate before you varnished. It could be all kinds of problems like that. So Don Day asks, suggestions on getting rid of a matte finish after varnishing. Okay, here's what the old boys would say. When you don't have your plate hot enough and you varnish that plate, you're going to retain some moisture in the collodion. Moisture in the collodion, and especially gum sandarac, those two things combined will call what's called drying dead, will produce a matte finish. So basically, Don, you have moisture somewhere, either in the air, on your plate, you're not getting the plate hot enough, or prolonging it long enough for it to, you need that 5% of water in the alcohol to get out. So the matte finish comes from some type of moisture with varnishing. So the best way to do that, a little more heat, dehumidifier if you live in high humidity area or a lot of humidity in the air. You can also get little orange peel stuff with humidity in there. Water is injurious to varnish, as they say in the 19th century in the primary literature. It can really raise hell with your varnish job. So reduce or increase the heat, reduce the humidity, and your plate should varnish really shiny, bright, and clean. That's the idea of this. I like high gloss, highly sheen plates. The varnish, the gum sander rack especially, I like a lot. So let's address Sean's question about safety tips for varnishing. So what do you have in varnish? You have, in this particular varnish, the varnish that I like to use, we have gum sander rack, alcohol, and lavender oil. So the alcohol, the solvent, is the carrier. The gum sander rack is the varnish itself, right? That comes from that's tree sap, comes from a large leaf conifer tree, also known as African frankincense. There's all kinds of ways you can make varnish. There's different varnishes out there, all the way from you can use a modern varnish. There's all kinds of different ones. This varnish happens, almost 20 years doing this. I have great results with it. I have no need to change. But that gum sander rack, alcohol is the carrier, and then lavender oil. Lavender oil is the oil that we call it a plasticizer. That means it'll keep the gum sander rack pliable, quote unquote, so you don't get those spider cracks all over the plate. And those are the three components. In that alcohol, you have 5% water. Hopefully you're using 95% ethanol. The other 5% is water. The important thing is, like I was just addressing Don's question, you need to make sure you have enough heat. The idea of heating that over a flame or over a kerosene lamp or in a toaster oven or whatever you're doing is to evaporate that 5% of water out as quickly as you can. Sean's question is addressing safety issues. Alcohol is a solvent. It's very flammable, right? We know that. We burn it in our alcohol lamps. We know it's flammable, very flammable. So over an open flame, and you have that varnish on there, which is alcohol, you can catch that on fire really easy. That's really easy to do. That's why in the video that I show you in my book there, I talk about my methodology of how I varnish, and I show you in the video of how I varnish plates. Every once in a while, I'll have somebody catch a plate on fire in a workshop. You don't need to freak out. Most of the time, the alcohol burns so clean, they don't even know the plate's on fire until a couple of seconds later. And I have them just turn, blow the flame out, and come back. Now, a lot of times, depending on how long it burns and if it pits the varnish and all that, we have to revarnish the plate. How do you avoid that? When you talk about hair dryers, that's a whole nother issue. Once you get a hair dryer, can you do that? Yes, you can. But once you get a hair dryer going, and I don't know about you, but I live like a normal human being. If I turned a hair dryer around where I'm varnishing, I'm going to kick up so much dust and animal hair and little micro pieces of stuff. Your plate's going to look like the moon. It's going to be cratered with all kinds of stuff. So hair dryers are not ideal in that sense. Anytime you move air around in your space that you're going to varnish in, you run the risk of stuff you can't see with your eyes coming down on the plate. People varnish your plate and say, oh my God, I got pits all over. What's going on? I filtered my varnish 100 times and I have pit. That's stuff in the air. That's what I talk about, spritzing the air with a water can or a water sprayer. A little bit of humidity in the air is okay. Sometimes you can pull that out and then heat your area up. Or, I have a furnace blowing over me right here. I'd never try to varnish a plate here if that furnace was running or the blower was going. So hair dryers are kind of I don't like them because you're going to end up with aesthetic problems on the plate itself. Halogen lamps. What you're talking about there is just a really hot source of heat. And again, any source of heat, you're still going to have a combustion problem if you get it too close or too much. Toaster ovens, high temperature lights. I've had people ask me about sun tanning lamps and things like that. Now you're running into other issues. Yes, they'll work. You can dry plates down. Sometimes it's not really effective or fast enough. Glass takes a long time to heat up. You need, a really pointed source. My little alcohol lamp here, wherever it is, I don't even know where it's, it might be in my mobile box. My little alcohol lamp, that little spirit flame is really hot. I can guide it around. Metal heats up like that. Glass takes a little longer. But a lot of times you'll have these problems of drying dead using light sources to heat. You have problems with contamination on the surface of your plate with hair dryers, like I said, blowing stuff around. A lot of people like the toaster ovens. If you have a toaster oven, turn it on to a couple hundred degrees, 100 degrees Celsius or so. Varnish your plates, put them in there, let them lay flat. It's closed up. It's a good environment. The problem with that, there's another big piece of equipment. I like some of the ideas and some of the inventions and some of the things, or not inventions, but some of the things people have repurposed for this process, but it just turns into another piece of equipment. We have so much equipment in this process, it turns into kind of a gaggle to try to manage that. So let's go on. So we're still on varnishing. So hair dryers, halogen lamps. For later, I varnished 3 times so far. I have problems with getting marks in the image from the varnish, but now they just dissolve after the varnish, even it's pre-mixed in fresh collodion. Okay, Samuel, I want to address, that was one of my points on my board. What happens when you have an image, you pour the varnish on, and it melts your image away? That's the number one thing. If you have my book on page 99, I talk about this. I have a paragraph in there about it. Let's talk about when you pour varnish on an image and it melts the image away. 2 things that are happening. Number 1, you're using a strong fresh varnish or a varnish that's made with alcohol that has a higher content than 95% ethanol, meaning you're using 96, 97, 98% alcohol. Or you can use this, have this in addition to, you're using older iodized oxidized collodion, more red, orange-red collodion. The older collodion, nitrocellulose gets weak. It gives you great tonal range. Nitrocellulose gets weak. You make your image. You pour your strong varnish on. And what I mean by strong is the alcohol content. And the alcohol, the solvent, actually melts or basically melts. You know what solvents do? Melts the nitrocellulose, taking the silver that's embedded on and embedded in the collodion with it, and it melts away. What you have to do there is you have to add, I start, if I have a 250 ml jug of varnish and I melted an image away or dissolved an image away, I start with 10 drops of distilled water. And what I'm doing is I'm bringing that alcohol level down and adding a little more water. What you run the risk of there is now you go back to Don's problem of drying dead. So you need to increase your heat. You stabilize the alcohol. You compensate for your older collodion. It's kind of weak when it comes to pouring. You're pouring a solvent on this stuff, right? So keep this in mind as we talk about this. So you're adding 10 drops. Try another image. If it still melts the image away, add another 10 drops. And I do that until that particular collodion and that particular varnish is interacting well. And I always use 50-degree heat at least on the plates. So premix varnish and fresh collodion. That's you'd have to tell me what that premix varnish, what's the alcohol content and fresh collodion. If it's fresh collodion, you have high alcohol, you're still going to do that. Could you comment on the temperature of the plate? Yeah, 50 degrees Celsius, 120, 130 degrees, all much so you can't hardly stand to touch the back of it. I say, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 50 degrees Celsius, 125, something like that. That's, if you could measure the temperature, that's what it would be. I use Everclear for varnish. Will denatured alcohol work as well? Don Day asks, will denatured alcohol work as well? Here's the problem. Denatured alcohol, what is denatured alcohol? Let's actually ask that question first. Oh, here's some collodion that would be highly iodized. That's the kind of color I'm talking about there, by the way, for melting your image away. But what is denatured alcohol? Denatured alcohol is ethanol that has been contaminated with something, an inhibitor. That's what they call it. They've added an inhibitor in the alcohol so you can't drink it. That's basically what it is. because alcohol is cheap to make. So they put the inhibitor in there so you can't drink it. That's why the price is so low. If you go to a liquor store here in America or a package store, whatever you want to call it, alcohol is very expensive. Drinking alcohol, this stuff here. This is how I buy it. I buy it in the 175 liter grain alcohol. I think that's $40 US or something like that. And so it's very expensive. It cost them maybe $2 or $3. The bottle's more expensive than the alcohol. So in denatured alcohol, they put an inhibitor in there. What's an inhibitor? Inhibitor is something like methyl ethyl ketone. There's all kinds of inhibitors, and they're nasty. They're bad on your health. Poor for you to breathe in. You can use denatured alcohol. Well, the way I use denatured alcohol is I use it to clean my equipment with, I clean my bottles with. I'll burn it in my alcohol lamp, but I never use it in my chemistry. Can you? Yes, you can. But at some point in time, depending on how these chemicals and compounds change over time, sometimes you're going to have something interact. And I especially wouldn't use it in my varnish or collodion. You might get away with it in your developer, okay, that kind of stuff. You could probably get away with all of it. But the minute I say you can use denatured alcohol in this process, the minute I'm going to get my inbox filled up with, hey, I used denatured alcohol and nothing works. Because that particular denatured alcohol has something in it that I've never heard of or nobody's really heard of, and it's interacting with something. So I recommend in your collodion, your varnish, especially denatured grain alcohol, 95% alcohol, 5% water. And I even recommend it in all the chemistry. Use the denatured to clean your stuff with and burn in your alcohol lamp if you use an alcohol lamp. I hope that makes sense. Hello, John. Hassel's Blade Runner. Hi, people from Ukraine. Hello, Mr. Blade Runner. Welcome. I'll try the water. Yep. Is it so important to get the varnish hot? No, it's not that important to get the varnish hot. If you're in a really cold area, you don't want that hitting. You'll know too, if your plate's too hot and your varnish is cold, the varnish will wiggle really weird on your plate. It won't give nice, smooth, round flows, right? So you don't want extreme temperature. I say take the chill off the varnish. You don't need to get it hot. No, you don't. That's kind of a misnomer. Take the chill off if you can. Sean, thanks, Quinn. Another safety question, but a bit off topic. Do you have any collodion safety tips? What's your opinion? Cadmium-free collodions. I don't have that up. Oh, well, I guess chemistry issues is the second one. I think, unless I have more questions, varnishing, that's all I really had on the varnishing. Chemistry, cadmium-free collodions. You bring up a good point, Sean. As I mention often and quite consistently, the most lethal or dangerous or deadly or however you want to say chemical in this process is the cadmium bromide, and specifically any cadmium, any heavy metal, whatever you're using. Why is that? Because it's a known carcinogenic. It causes cancer. The good thing about it is it produces the best images in my mind. It produces, in combination with some other things, you're not going to get, when I talk about, let's clarify this before I address the safety issue. When I talk about the best images, what I'm talking about is producing a positive or a negative with tonal range, with color, with proper exposure, those kinds of things. That's what I'm, textbook best image, properly exposed, properly developed, proper chemistry used to post-production, varnishing, those kinds of things, proper reduction developer, restrainer, those kinds of things. So when you don't have really well-made images to compare your images with, your images might look great and you might be completely satisfied with them. And then you'll get in the company of somebody with well-made images and you say, oh boy, I'm way off here. That's the problem with this process. People don't have anything to compare with. And things online, you can only scan or photograph these plates to a certain degree to make them, appear. You need to have them in your hand. You need to be looking at them in live, in flesh, to understand this. But when you don't have anything to compare with, when I say best images, Cadmium-free collodions make fine images, right? They make an image, right? They make any kind of images you want, I guess, in that context. When I talk about optimal, people ask me, why do I use cyanide and why do I use cadmium? And the reason is I want the optimal quality of my image. If I'm going to go to all this trouble to go to locations or to travel places or to make portraits of people or do landscape images, I want everything in my favor. Everything that I can have in my favor, I want there to assist me to make the best possible image I can, whether it's a positive or a negative. Having said that, yes, you can make cadmium-free collodion and make photographs in this process, no doubt about it. What's the downside? So the upside is making higher quality images, in my mind, with cadmium and fixing in cyanide, better looking images, more archival. Some of those things are kind of scientifically, there's evidence for that. What's the downside of using cadmium? Well, you're addressing it, safety issues. Now, cadmium, as I said, is a carcinogenic. It causes cancer. It's an airborne issue, meaning that when you open that jar up, if you breathe that in, if you have fans blowing or if you have things going on, you run the risk of inhaling that. It's an airborne issue, an aerosol issue. So in all the cadmium that I've ever seen or purchased, they have a dampening agent in there. It dampens. It's almost like it's a semi-wet flour, if you will. So there's not a lot of risk of having airborne issues or aerosol issues there. And on top of that, in my videos, I show you how I mitigate that airborne issue. It's the first compound that I mix when I'm making collodion. I show you how to throw that into the water and mitigate that straight away. Secondly, handling. You say, okay, now you got in the collodion, you spill the collodion on you. Hopefully you're wearing gloves. And to be honest with you, at this point, unless you had cuts, and I mean, you don't want to soak your hands in collodion. You don't want to do any of that kind of thing. But the risk of that is so low at this point after the aerosol or airborne issue is mitigated that you're pretty much in the clear. I don't want to state definitively, and we don't want to find out, but those are the issues. And then I'll also add this. Every year, or most every year, that I've been working in this process, and especially the years that I've made thousands of plates, I have my blood panel checked, and I check for heavy metals and mercury, because I worked in daguerreotypes for quite a while as well too. So I had my blood checked for heavy metals and mercury, cadmium and mercury, and came up zero. So I can say with some, at least anecdotal evidence, that my methodology works, and I use nothing but cadmium for my bromide and my salts and my collodion. So if you use it, I stress this, absolutely safety number one, beyond anything else in this process, safety number one. If you're not comfortable using it, don't use it. It's as simple as that. We're not solving the world's problems by making wet plate images. So definitely, if you don't feel comfortable using it, don't use it. Hey, Eufus, dropping in to say best to you and Jeannie. Thank you, Eufus. Best to you. Yeah, Cat Daddy, back to the darkroom. Good job, brother. Good seeing you. Thanks for dropping in. Yes, Jean, back to varnish for any opinion on shellac. Shellac is great. Shellac is a wonderful compound to use if you're into that and you like that. I happen to like the color. I actually use that. My 4 words that pin up my work or hold my work up: identity, difference, memory, and justice. Those 4 words are like table legs for my work. And one of the first word or second word, memory. I like that idea. Sorry, I got some sunlight coming in here, hitting on my head here. The second word there is memory. And the memory idea of memory is that kind of warm color in the image that kind of evokes that, style. So I use that to my advantage in the process. So, but if you like shellac and you want to spin the color out with a carbon filter, the varnish, the gum sand rack, you can do all those things if you want to go to that effort. Again, I try to minimize the equipment, the processes, and everything else with the type of image, the quality of image that I want, and the aesthetic of the image, with the how I handle, how much I have to handle, and how many post-production or pre-production steps I have to do. So I like shellac. Shellac's great. What happens if you don't use additional ether in your collodion, and what will change? If you don't use additional, let's talk about what ether does in the process, right? You already have, this additional ether because you're addressing it. You already have quite a bit of ether in the collodion, in the raw mixture of collodion. What if you don't add, or if you add alcohol and substitute the ether with alcohol? You're going to raise the water content of your collodion, and the old literature says the same thing about water and collodion is injurious to collodion, meaning you're going to get these kind of, it's going to be weak. A lot of times you won't be able to run a cotton ball over it. It'll be like wet toilet paper. If you don't add any additional ether, and you just forego that 160 mils or 80 mils or whatever you're doing, you're going to have gum. You're not going to flow well. You're going to have all kinds of problems with the actual flowing of the plate, the adherence. Ether acts when it evaporates. It goes so quickly. It evaporates and kind of helps with adherence to the plates. Not metal, but glass definitely. So you'll run into problems with that. I only put heavy metal in my ears. There you go. That's a good place for heavy metal. Can you comment on obtaining KCN? Pat, hello, Pat. Yes, if you want to get KCN, contact me, and I can address that for you. There's a little bit of a issue now with KCN. There's been a lot of people that have unfortunately used it for ill purposes, specifically killing themselves, believe it or not. And God forbid somebody gets a hold of it that's not in the right mindset and does something even beyond that. So there's a little bit of a legal issue, and I can address that for you if you want to contact me, Pat. I'm happy to address that for you. What else do we have here? I use denatured 96% alcohol, and according to the label, uses point. Yep, that's right. Oh, centramide as the denaturant, but not always. I have black dot. Yep, that's right. You're right, Federico. You're on it. See, so now you start connecting those dots. Get it? Now you start connecting those ideas of, look, what's in my compounds that I'm using? What are the post-production issues? What am I seeing on the plates? How is the exposure and chemistry working together? You're absolutely right about that. I don't know exactly what centramide is, but it sounds like a wicked 0.30, 0.25 to 0.30%. Yeah, that's quite a bit. And 96% alcohol. So watch your varnishing dissolving your image issues too. Once the collodion is mixed, is the risk of airborne cadmium reduced, mitigated? Yes, it is, Sean. That's what I said. Once that is done, and if you see the video on, and I don't know if you have my book or not, or the video access to the videos, but if you watch my collodion mixing video, or both of them, all of them, whatever, you'll see how I mitigate that in a little 50 ml beaker with some distilled water in it, and I talk about the dampening agent and mixing that in. Once that hits water, it turns in, you know it's a metal. In fact, you can even heat it up a little bit to dissolve it. Once that's in water, no more aerosol issue at all. I mean, and to be honest with you, those midtones in your plates are going to be much, much better using something like that, to my mind. And, again, this is all subjective. So some of it's not. We can actually compare images and talk about what a better image is and what not so great image is, and tonal range and what you're after and all that. But yes, so let's talk about, we'll come back to this. Let's talk about Marcus wanting customers. Here's another question Marcus Hofstadter asked about. What about when you're making photographs, doing commission portraits? You're doing a commercial piece, or you're working commercially in wet collodion, or you're doing a demos or whatever you're doing, right? And you make, and I do this all the time. I make portraits of sitters, We wash the plate, we process the plates, we wash the plates, we varnish the plate. What I do, this is what I do, Marcus. You'll notice sometimes, unfortunately my plate is pretty clean here, on the back of your glass or your metal, you'll have this this kind of dusty stuff that you can wipe off. That's basically what that is unexposed silver that's been exposed with developer, and it has some compounds in it, not necessarily deadly, but you surely wouldn't want to be licking it with your tongue or handling it with your fingers and licking your fingers or eating or whatever. So what we like to do is we like to take a little bit of denatured alcohol, wipe the backs of the plate off. And two, if you spilled a little varnish on the back of the plate, or if it's glass, you don't want those marks, take a little denatured alcohol. You do two things. You varnish the plate, and the back of the plate you've cleaned off, put it in the rack, you can give to the customer. They can handle it. It doesn't matter. No problem at all. So that's handling plates. And it's a good question, because a lot of times people forget that you're handing them a plate and they've never had these things before. They don't know what to do or not to do with these things. So it's a good point, Marcus. Yes, Pat, you can contact me, and if you're in the States here, I can get you hooked up with some good fixer. Let's go back to chemistry issues. The big thing, do you know the number one cause of death in the 19th century in wet collodion photography? You know what that was? If you don't, read Bill J's Dangers in the Darkroom. It's a PDF. I think you can find it on my website too. Number one cause of death, explosions. Why explosions? Because they had wood burning stoves. They had no real sense of safety to a large extent, and they used these very volatile collodion, ether, alcohol, really volatile compounds. So number one cause of death were explosions, and mostly due to open flames. So you always want to make sure you handle these solvents very, even as much or more so. You can't say this is more important than that. It's all safety, and you want to handle them. Cadmium, cyanide, solvents, any of these things, you always want to make sure. Number one, store them in a good, dark, cool place. Make sure they're sealed. Make sure they're away from your family, friends, animals, neighbors. Make sure you're in good control of them. Don't let kids have access to your dark room or your coolers or your storage areas. Those are just basic common sense things. But then when you're handling them, make sure you work in a well-ventilated area. Make sure that you're not getting in your dark box and pouring your collodion and huffing up the ether and all that. Ether is highly addictive, and what did Gonzo say? Ether's the perfect drug for Las Vegas, fear and loathing in Las Vegas. So in the 1920s, there were a lot of medical doctors that would take rags and huff ether, that have a rag. They use it as they use it as an anesthesia. Anesthesiologists used it to put people under for surgery. So you get high off of it, but it's really, really hard on your liver. So make sure you work in a well-ventilated area. We did the Archer Project in London in 2010. Wow, 10 years ago. You believe that? And John Brewer looked up his found his death certificate. Scott Archer died of liver failure. And I bet you dollars to donuts, 1813 to 1857, quite a young man. I mean, I know 19th century, not so much, but quite a young man. I bet you anything ether contributed, at least. Maybe, I don't know if he drank a lot of alcohol either, but alcohol and ether, boy, they're hard on your liver. So be forewarned of that. We talked about cadmium. Cyanide, it's obvious. You never want cyanide. If you use cyanide, you never want it coming into contact with any form of acid. That's really, that covers pretty much the big ones. And you really don't want to have, you don't want to put yourself in harm's way, and you surely don't want to put your family, friends, your neighbors, your animals, anybody else in harm's way using this process. So if you are knowledgeable, number one, understand how this works. Look, people get into this and spend gobs of money, gobs of time, they step over $1 to pick up a dime. Spend some time, spend a little money, learn how the process works, be knowledgeable of it, be confident. And the minute you go out in public and start doing this, people are going to ask you questions, right? So you want to be able to answer those questions. You want to be safe about things. You don't want to hurt people. So spend your time learning how to do this stuff. Any tips for storing chemicals which you keep apart? Yes. Just like I said, and I reiterate this over and over in my literature, store in a dark, cool place. What I mean by dark, put your chemistry in coolers, close them up, cool, 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit and below, and dark. Keep it dark, mostly for your silver bath and your collodion, mostly for your collodion. Keep everything capped, sealed, all your raw chemistry. Make sure you don't store very volatile things in glass, meaning KCN is in plastic. You get the idea, right? Just be sensible about it. And mostly storing it in a dark, cool place is not only for safety, but for the longevity of your chemistry as well. Light, heat exacerbates oxidation. Oxidation is somewhat of our enemy to some point in this process. You want some of it, we know that, but you want to manage and mitigate and maintain that. Marianne, you're very welcome, Marianne. Thank you for watching my videos. I appreciate the kind words. Like I said, I've been, as of late, I've been a little bit behind the ball on doing these videos. I had greater expectations. Now we're building our homestead and we're doing all those things I talk about. I'm glad I got the book done. I'm glad I got the videos made, the new videos. I was fortunate to get those out of the way before this big build starts. We plan on being, I hope, God, fingers crossed, right? We plan on being on our property in June. So that's not far away. So we've had we've invested a lot of time in prepping and getting the land ready and doing all that stuff. I haven't had a lot of time to jump on and do these, but every time I get a chance, I'll announce it. I'll come on. If I have a hole for an hour here and there, I'll get on and try to answer questions. And I appreciate you guys coming in and asking the questions, because at the end of the day, I can only address what's given to me. And I get a lot of emails, and I understand that people always have questions about their personal technical issues, or even sometimes conceptual, that happens as well too. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to help one another, and I'm trying to, I've been in this game long enough now, and I feel like I have a good handle on the process. I feel confident in how to handle these chemicals, how to work with them, how to make positives and negatives, how to print, all of those things. So anytime I'm able to share those things and help you guys out, I love to do that. So, and I appreciate all your support on my book. Like I said, I have a few of these left, but for all those that you purchased them and got the videos and things, I really appreciate that. I appreciate that support, and to know that those monies went to our property, which will then I'll open up another mountain retreat up there. And for those that can come and spend a week with us on the mountain, you'll have a nice north-lit studio and a nice dark room, and do all the processes in the peace and quiet of the mountains. And so hopefully, we hope for the best for the 2020s, and I hope this decade is, I hope it's not what it's brewing up they say it's brewing up. I hope we find some peace and tranquility, and I hope the madness stops to some degree. But if it doesn't, we all have to make do with our own philosophies in life, and make changes accordingly. And one thing I've always loved about the wet plate process, it's been a great refuge for me. It's been cathartic. It's been my therapist. It's been my communicator. It's been my tool that I can go to and make work and talk about work. It's just such a beautiful thing to be physical, to have your hands. We just don't touch photographs anymore. They're all online. We don't get to handle them and touch them and feel them and look at them. And I love physical objects. More and more as we get into this digital stuff and we get away from reality of life, it's just really nice. It's been very cathartic for me to work in the process, to share the process of what I've learned, and hopefully inspire people to make your own work, to tell your own story, to use this process, as a vehicle for your narrative, to not just be a process photographer, but to use it in service of your ideas about your work. Well, thank you, Marcus. And I got to go too. I'm about finished up here. Just an idea for everyone. I give a sheet with instructions with my plate to my customers. Excellent. Yes, perfect. That's a great idea, Marcus. If you're out there making commercial work or doing demos and portraits, educate. Don't mislead people, and don't get off on the wrong track about giving them bad information. But learn the process, spend some time, get involved, and share that. We're all kind of responsible for carrying it on. So thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate the kind words. I do. And I appreciate all your support. My battery's at 12% on my laptop. I got to go. I'm going to run down and get some farm fresh eggs for the day. I'm meeting a lady down here picking up some eggs. So I'm going to take off. Thanks, Tom. Great to see you. Yes, everything's going wonderful. We're well on our way. And again, big fingers crossed to get on our homestead on our build on June. So you're very welcome, Sean. Thanks for joining in. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. And I'll get on here again in the next week or so. Send me your questions. That's what I use to do these things with. If I have something prepared, I can come in. I'm open to answer any questions you want to come in and do live as well too. But if you have something specifically you want to address, send it to me and we'll get on that. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and happy 2020, and we'll see you next time.